The first thing that I started to look at is, okay, who out there is doing a good job of leg locking? And the honest answer was, there weren't a lot of people. What you would see is random success with leg locks. You'd see a guy wins a match here, a guy wins a match there. Um, Most of the eminent leg lockers of that generation are actually coming out of Japan. You'd had people like Romina Sato had a decent heel hook for that time.
Imanari.
Imanari, that was a little bit pre-Imanari. Imanari came slightly after Romina Sato. They fought each other in grappling matches. A couple of, one was younger than the other. Um, uh, but they had some success. I believe even Sakuraba finished Newton with a knee bar. So the knowledge was there. Um, but there was nothing systematic about it. There weren't people who were coming out and just systematically finishing people with one move. Okay, um, so there wasn't much in terms of people to study. So the first thing I started to asking is, well, what is the nature of leg locking? What if it seems to have some problems associated with it. It's not as controlling as the traditional methods of jiu-jitsu, and that was really the key word there, control. Okay, why do people favor things like rear naked strangle so much? Because it's such a controlling position. Rear mount is an incredibly controlling position. Why do people favor things like karagatame, the arm triangle? Because this too is a very inherently controlling position. All the most high percentage finishing holds in jiu-jitsu all have control as their dominant feature. Okay, it's hard for people to work, and as a result, one person can continue to use the same move with a large degree of success over time against a wide array of opponents. So every question I asked ultimately always came back to control. And the one thing you would see with regards to the use of leg locks in the late 1990s and early 2000s was a lack of control. So all of my studies immediately went to the notion of control. Now, there are many forms of leg lock, but the ones that interest me the most always come out of what the Japanese call Ashi Garami. Ashi Garami is a generic term. It just means tangled legs. Okay? There are many different forms of Ashi Garami. Ashi Garami is a mechanism by which I can use two of my legs to control my opponent's legs and hips. What I started to do was make a deep study of this notion of Ashi Garami. How am I going to use my legs to control the real estate between my opponent's knee and his hips, preferably on both sides? Probably the single biggest cliche that you'll hear about jiu-jitsu is that it's position before submission. At the time, I was primarily interested in the idea of control before submission. Control is a much deeper and wider concept than the basic point structure based position before submission model of jiu-jitsu. There's many ways to control people that have very little to do with position. For example, Ashi Garami itself scores nothing in jiu-jitsu, but done well, it can control an opponent just as well as rear mount can. So I started to see that there were many forms of control that went outside of the traditional basic positional hierarchy of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Ashi Garami is one of them. Probably the single greatest key in the development of my leg lock system, again, came from a simple realization that the greatest mistake that people had made in leg lock work prior to the arrival of the squad was that they made no distinction between the mechanism of breaking and the mechanism of control. Ashi Garami was the mechanism of control. The lock itself, whether it be a heel hook, an Achilles lock, a figure four toe hold, that was the mechanism of breaking. If you watch 99% of the people out there who claim to be experts in leg locking, they don't distinguish between the two. They see, for example, heel hooking as a single skill. There's the lock on the legs, the Ashi Garami, or whatever term they use for it, and the lock itself, they're not distinguished. They're taught as a single skill. You can't differentiate the Ashi Garami and the lock. And you'll see people teaching in this manner. What I did was to strongly distinguish between the two so that my students could all hold an Ashi Garami position and switch from one Ashi Garami to another and hold people for extended periods of time and inhibit movement. If I can inhibit movement for long periods of time, I can break you at will. I can take my time when I come to break you because the control is there. The control is prior and the break is second. For most people, it's just throw on the Ashi Garami and immediately go for the lock. They don't even distinguish. The Ashi Garami is described as part of the heel hook. They don't distinguish between the two. Once I made that realization in the early 2000s, that's when the ball started rolling. That's when a significant amount of progress was made. I would say that your question was an interesting one. Okay, you had the insight. Lister gave you the insight. What started you going? It was making first a critical distinction between control and submission. And in the case of leg locking, between the mechanism of control, Ashi Garami, and the mechanism of breaking, which is the lock itself. In my case, the heel hook.
A really good example of this is how effective it's been implemented by your students against real world class Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competitors who don't use these methods. Like a good one is Gordon Ryan versus Cyborg.
Yes.
Cyborg, who is a fucking beast of a man and just a physical specimen, a real freak, and is known for his tornado guard, is no stranger to leg locks, is no stranger to any of the positions of no-gi or gi jiu-jitsu. But when I watched Gordon wrap him up and control him, and before he got the submission, you could see Cyborg look completely befuddled.
Yeah. The match was over roughly 30 seconds before the submission was applied.
Yeah, he was just trying to figure out a way out of it, and just was
There's nowhere to go. Yeah.
It was a terrifying position to be in for a real world-class Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt like Cyborg. When you watch that match, I was like, this is stunning, because Gordon is what, 21?
Yes.
Which is amazing. And Cyborg's in his 30s, right?
I think Cyborg has been a black belt many, many years longer than Gordon has even been doing jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
He's one of the best guys in the world. And when you look at how well Gordon dismantled him on the ground using the strategy that you just described,